This is it. Today's the day. I'm servicing my Patrol. Really should have done that before I put the car there, but anyway. Now, I'm no expert at this at all. I have very little experience with like mechanical stuff. I know the basics, and I've done a few services before. Never on this car though. I've only had this car for 10,000 Ks, and it's well and truly time for service. So I'm going to attempt to do this at home with fairly limited gear. It's not like I'm at a shop with heaps of stuff, so I'm gonna see how I go.
All I bought for this service is 10 litres of engine oil, a 16 litre drip pan and a service kit that fits my car. Check out the back of your owner's manual before doing a service to see what parts and fluids are best for you and more information on how to actually conduct the service.
And so as I said before, I'm no expert, I'm definitely no mechanic. I'm hoping that I can show you that this kind of stuff can be done at home.
The gas struts are going out under the bonnet of my car, so I've had to chock it up with something from the shed. To start with the engine oil, remove the cap located on the top of the engine. I noticed that there was some old oil sitting around the cap, meaning that the cap was probably leaking. By taking off the cover, I was able to inspect more of the area to identify exactly what had gone wrong. There are 5 10mm bolts on the top, which come out pretty easy. The plastic cover then lifts off. After checking around for any more residue, we can see that it was just a missing gasket on the cap that was causing the issue. Rest the cap over the hole. Time to pull out the drain plug. It's best to do this job with gloves on to avoid getting oil on your hands, but I was being a bit silly. To avoid oil getting on my hands, I allowed the drain plug to drop into the pan. Don't make the same mistake I did, as I later had to fish it out of 8 litres of oil. While the oil's draining, let's check out the service kit. Here we've got the oil filter, fuel filter, and intake filter, which will now replace while the oil's draining. We can see the intake here on the left front of the car, and the filter sits in the cylinder in the corner. Gently remove any hoses and undo the 4 pins around the top of the filter. This is the easiest part of the whole service process. Then we can gently lift the top of the intake off and pull out the old air filter. Then it's as simple as putting the new one in and reversing the order to put it back together.
Engine oil is drained. We've got the new air filter in. I would highly recommend wearing an old shirt. This one, kind of old, but I thought there was more clearance on these things than there is, but anyway. Now I'm going to change the oil filter and then we'll change the fuel filter. But first I need to fish the drain plug out of the oil because I did a very silly thing. This is not going to be fun.
It's best to wear gloves through the whole process, which is why I've now put some on to fish out this plug. Be very careful if you have to do anything like this. The oil will still be hot. Make sure you put the plug back in before we fill up the oil. This is a mistake I've gladly not made yet. Touch on wood. Tighten it to the proper spec, or in this case to finger tight plus a little nudge. You don't want to over tighten anything because it'll strip pretty easily. Now onto the oil filter, which you can just see down there. This one in particular has its own housing. You can remove it using a socket wrench without a socket attached. This one was on pretty tight and took a bit of negotiating to get out. Careful, they've got oil in them as well. Make sure you've got a drain pan underneath to catch anything.
So there is the oil filter. That's what it looks like. There's the housing and then the actual filter is on the inside. There's always a bit of oil in here, so just be mindful of that. There you go. And then we'll also replace the O-ring, which sits just here. So I'll go get a pick and get that off. I'm fully blaming that on my hands being oily. So now I just want to like coat this in a bit of the new oil, and I should be using gloves, but I'm being naughty.
By lubricating the O-rings, it'll stop them from seizing in the future.
And then that goes on back on the thing. Cool. Make sure that's all done. Like so. Clean up this a bit. There we go.
I was having trouble getting the filter housing out, so I removed my battery. Turns out the base plate was actually the issue, so to get the filter housing out, I had to go down the back and underneath some other parts before I could finally get to the filter. It took a bit of negotiating, but it did come out eventually. Put a little bit of oil back into the filter housing to start soaking the filter. This will stop the car from starting dry when you turn it over again for the first time. Now negotiate it back down and screw it on. Nip it up with a wrench and torque it to spec. Don't over tighten these because they generally get tighter over time and they'll become really hard to get off if over tightened. There we go, new filter in and ready to fill up the oil. Make sure you check the capacity before doing this and avoid overfilling. Clean off the dipstick, let it sit for a while and check it again in a few minutes. Top up the oil if needed, but make sure it's full at this point. Then we can turn the car over, let it sit for a few more minutes and check the level again.
Oil is done. I haven't started the car yet because I'm going to try and replace the fuel filter, but this is the part that probably worries me most. Only because I know that the fuel filter is full of diesel, and I don't know why, but my head just gets funny with diesel rather than oil. I'm okay with oil going around the place a bit, but diesel just doesn't sit well with me. Anyway. And also because the filter is in such a weird spot. Like, look, it's down there. So that's the filter. That's the little hand pump. This is my screwdriver to try to get it out. Okay, I guess I'll just undo all these hoses and hope that diesel doesn't come pouring out.
The easiest way to replace these filters is to pull the whole thing out and do it at the workbench. Here's a better look at where the fuel filter is sitting and the hoses that I've got to disconnect on the top.
Wait, is that part of the housing? Right? That's part of it? You're kidding. Because there's a hose that runs through it. If this doesn't come out now, I'm gonna be mad.
Okay, I'm sorry, but that does not look like something that should come out.
This does not look right at all. Anyway, that is not the same, is it?
No.
Well, that's a bit annoying. There's always something that's not the same in this engine. Anyone else's kind of YouTube video or anything on the internet where they talk about a GU patrol, this car always has one or two things that's just different. And that's the first time of seeing this housing before. Alicia, we're doing a giveaway this episode. Free fuel filter.
But seriously, I don't need this filter at all. If you'd like a free filter to keep for your next service or to have a spare for a long trip, hit subscribe and leave a comment saying you'd like it.
So it turned out the fuel filter was not the right size, which is kind of annoying. Moment of truth now. We're going to turn it over and hope it starts. Purring like a kitten. So there you have it. It's not impossible for an average Joe, pardon the pun, to service your four-wheel drive. I'm gonna end it there. All I've got to do now is put the cap back on the top of the engine and put my auxiliary battery back in. But other than that, it all went pretty smoothly. The car started up fine. It actually sounds quieter than it did, and I think that's because I put a new seal on the oil cap, which I didn't show you, but there wasn't actually a seal on there before, and it was leaking oil out the top. So I've replaced that. I'm gonna go wash my hands and eat, but glad I did it. And turns out, yeah, it's not that hard to service your four-wheel drive with little to no experience. Did I pull out the wrong
That?
thing?
Confusion.